The Exorcist is one of the most terrifying tales in cinematic history, but behind the haunting scenes of the 1973 film lies a true story even more chilling than fiction. The origins of this iconic horror tale trace back to an exorcism that occurred in 1949, involving a young boy known as Roland Doe, a pseudonym used to protect his identity. What began as innocent curiosity spiraled into a living nightmare, forever altering the lives of everyone involved and leaving behind a legacy of fear that endures to this day. The innocent beginning, a game turns sinister. Roland was a typical 13-year-old boy living in the quiet suburb of Cottage City, Maryland. Described by those who knew him as bright but introverted, he found solace in the company of his family, especially his Aunt Harriet. Harriet was an eccentric figure with a keen interest in spiritualism and the occult. She often dabbled with a Ouija board, a mystical tool said to connect the living with the spirit world. On one particular evening, she introduced Roland to the game as a form of entertainment, a mere curiosity to pass the time. What started as innocent fun quickly took a dark turn. Shortly after Aunt Harriet's sudden death from an unknown illness, Roland, grieving and desperate for a way to reach her, continued to use the Ouija board on his own. He believed that it might be the only way to communicate with his beloved aunt, unaware that in his naivety, he had potentially opened a doorway to forces far darker and more dangerous than he could ever imagine. The haunting begins, first signs of darkness. It was not long after Harriet's death that strange occurrences began to unfold in the family's home. At first, there were faint sounds, muffled knocking, footsteps echoing through empty hallways, the rustling of objects when no one was near. The noises seemed harmless at first, almost like harmless creaks of an old house. But soon, these disturbances grew louder and more frequent, enough to wake the entire family in the middle of the night. The knocks on the walls became bangs, reverberating throughout the house like the hammering of an unseen force demanding entry. Then came the physical manifestations. Objects moved on their own, chairs slid across the floor, tables shook violently, and household items were thrown to the ground without any explanation. The most unnerving incident occurred when Roland's bed began to tremble uncontrollably at night. He would lie awake in terror, feeling an unseen force gripping him, holding him down as if invisible hands were trying to drag him away. Worse still, deep scratches and welts began to appear on Roland's skin, emerging without warning and sometimes spelling out words or symbols that defied understanding. The family was left paralyzed by fear and confusion, unable to comprehend what was happening to their child. A desperate search for answers, science and faith clash. As the supernatural occurrences escalated, Roland's parents became increasingly frantic to find a rational explanation. They took him to a series of doctors, psychiatrists, and even neurologists. The boy underwent numerous tests, but no medical cause for his condition could be found. He was, by all accounts, physically healthy. Yet, his symptoms persisted and even grew worse. His behavior became erratic, and he spoke in strange voices. The family's quest for a solution from the world of science left them more perplexed than ever. With no other options, Roland's parents turned to the church, hoping that the spiritual realm might hold the answers science could not provide. They sought out the help of a local priest, Father Albert Hughes. After hearing the family's story and witnessing some of the strange occurrences firsthand, Father Hughes was convinced that there was more to this than just a troubled child. He suspected that Roland might be under the influence of a malevolent force. The first attempt, a failed exorcism. Father Hughes made the bold decision to conduct an exorcism. The ritual was to take place at Georgetown University Hospital, where it was believed that the safety of a clinical setting would provide some level of control over the unpredictable events that might unfold. As the priest began the rites, reading prayers of exorcism, Roland's behavior escalated into outright violence. He screamed in languages he had never learned, his voice taking on deep, guttural tones. He thrashed against the restraints with a strength far beyond that of a normal boy his age, hurling obscenities and even managing to break free at one point, slashing the priest's arm with a bed spring. Father Hughes was forced to abandon the exorcism, retreating in fear for his own life. The failure only deepened the family's despair. Enter Father William Bowdern. The battle escalates. Left with no other recourse, the family sought help from another priest, Father William Bowdern, a Jesuit with a history of resilience and faith. He arrived at the Doe household armed with holy water, relics, and a dogged determination to drive out the entity. Accompanied by a young assistant priest, Father Walter Halloran, Bowdern began a series of nightly exorcism sessions that would last for weeks. The sessions were grueling. Roland exhibited increasingly disturbing signs of possession, levitating off his bed, convulsing violently, and speaking in voices that did not belong to him. His demeanor would shift suddenly, one moment pleading for help in a child's voice and the next snarling obscenities at the priests. Unexplained phenomena surrounded the boy, from the foul stench that filled the air during the rituals to the sight of objects hurling themselves across the room. Each time the priests thought they were making progress, the evil presence seemed to redouble its strength, pushing Roland to further extremes of rage and self-harm. The priests, exhausted but resolute, persisted in their efforts. Roland would often writhe in agony as the prayers were recited, his skin breaking out in fresh scratches that seemed to appear on cue as the demonic presence reacted to the sacred words. The boy's voice would change with startling regularity, sometimes adopting the tone of a calm, calculating stranger, other times mimicking the growls of a wild animal. The entity within him claimed to be multiple beings, mocking the priests with intimate details about their lives and blasphemous insults. The climactic exorcism, light at the end of darkness. After weeks of ceaseless struggle, the priests prepared for one final attempt, a climactic showdown with the forces that tormented the boy. The session took place in St. Louis, at a secluded wing of Election Brothers Hospital, far away from curious onlookers and potential distractions. With candles flickering in the dimly lit room, Father Bowdern began the most intense round of prayers yet. The atmosphere was suffocating, a feeling of dread hung thick in the air. As the exorcism progressed, Roland's body twisted unnaturally, and his screams filled the room, echoing off the walls. The priests recited the rites with relentless fervor, calling upon the power of Christ to cast out the demon. Then, something extraordinary happened. In a moment of calm amidst the chaos, Roland shouted a phrase that seemed to shake the very foundations of the room, "I am Michael. I command you to leave now." It was as though the archangel himself had spoken through the boy, driving away the dark forces that had held him captive. With that declaration, Roland collapsed onto the bed, his body finally still. A silence settled over the room, one so profound it seemed to absorb all the tension and fear that had plagued the long weeks of exorcisms. For the first time in months, Roland experienced peace. The evil presence was gone, and his recovery began almost immediately. Aftermath, the long shadow of fear. Roland returned to a normal life, though his family remained cautious and protective, keeping the details of the events closely guarded. The boy had no memory of his ordeal, as if his mind had shielded him from the horrors he had endured. For years, the church maintained silence about what had transpired, with only a select few knowing the full story. It wasn't until 1971, when author William Peter Blatty, who had heard whispers of the case while a student at Georgetown University, published his novel The Exorcist, that the world learned of the harrowing events in Maryland and St. Louis. The book, and the subsequent film adaptation, stirred controversy and fascination, reigniting debates about the reality of demonic possession and the limits of human understanding. The Exorcist remains not just a horror story, but a gripping narrative about the battle between faith and the unknown, the relentless pursuit of salvation, and the darkness that lurks just beyond the veil of the ordinary world. It is a reminder that there are things in this world we may never fully comprehend, forces that defy explanation and exist in the margins of belief and reality.